Welcome to the Israel Daily News Podcast. We have here with us the Executive Director of the Middle East Forum, Gregg Roman. Thank you for joining us on our program.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me about your team. How many people do you have? What do you do? What's the intention?
Sure. So we have about 25 full-time employees, an additional 40 fellows that cover all areas of the Middle East, from subject matter expertise on countries, on regional issues like energy, militaries, ideology. We were founded about 31 years ago in Philadelphia by Daniel Pipes, renowned Harvard Middle East scholar. Daniel retired earlier this year, allowing me to become executive director of the organization. I myself have been with MEF for about 10 years, and we cover really everything to do with the Middle East, but also the ideology emanating from the region. So whether that's radical Islam, the tenets of Islamism in Western liberal democracies, or the effects of Middle Eastern states and non-state actors on the West.
Yesterday we were having a really interesting discussion at lunch. Sometimes it's good to come to lunch late, sometimes not. And the benefit of me joining lunch late yesterday was that I got to meet you. And you were talking about a whole load of things and individuals who were misproperly using funds, as well as being quite influenced as their pockets grew larger from Qatari money. Can you take me through that?
I wouldn't call it an improper use of funds. I would call it immoral, and I think unacceptable if you're claiming to be pro-Israel, if you're claiming to be in favor of American values. So you have, first of all, anything to do with the country of Qatar because of their malign behavior towards the United States and its allies. But more so, it was sort of representative of what the Qatari influence machine has been able to do in Washington and throughout the rest of the United States. And now there's even allegations of it taking place in Jerusalem, of what their ultimate goals are, which is, instead of being a fair-minded, neutral arbiter or mediator as it relates to the hostage crisis and a lot of other regional issues, they're using this for nefarious means to try to get the best deal for them rather than thinking of anyone else.
What kind of deals are in it for them?
So Qatar as a country, since its inception in the early 70s, its breakaway from British control over the protectorate that was present there in the Trucial states when the United Arab Emirates came to form and the Tamim family came to power, was to be unlike any other Gulf Arab state. They practice a much more conservative form of Islam than the tolerant and open-minded Emiratis have come to form. They support actors like the Muslim Brotherhood, and not just the group in Egypt when Mohammed Morsi was the president after the fall of the president there. But they've also gone to become the banker for Islamist and radical ideologies across the Middle East. They're paying right now the government salaries of the Syrian jihadist government under Ahmed al-Shara or Mohammed al-Jalani, depending how you want to call him. They have bailed out Turkish banks. They have served as the conduit for Iranians to bank billions of dollars in Qatari banks to be able to skirt sanctions. They have gone so far as to support revolutions against American allies in this region for the past 15 years, and they continue with their pernicious behavior. That's just in the region. You might ask, what did they get out of it? They're a country of around 350,000 individuals who are citizens. There's another 2 or 3 million expats who essentially are involved in slave labor throughout Doha and the rest of the country. They have one of the largest, if not largest, natural gas fields, the Fars field, which they share with Iran. And it's sort of like a sovereign Napoleonic complex. Because they are so small and because they feel as if though they are not mighty, they project their power through every avenue of influence that they can find, whether it's through Al Jazeera. And, I don't even have to mention their initial broadcasting of jihadi videos with Osama bin Laden after 9/11. Today, they are Hamas's largest media cheerleader. And they bring on both Arabs to speak about in Arabic, but they bring on so-called Western experts to toe the line on the Qatari message of the day on Al Jazeera English. They even went so far as to try to appeal on social media to individuals with a conservative leaning in the United States through AJ+, or those who have more of a liberal leaning. And the messages that they use in one language are completely disopposite from what they're doing when they're speaking to their own citizens back at home or to Arabs in Arabic. Now, that gives them control of media airwaves through Al Jazeera, but they also make investments in sports. They essentially bribed FIFA to get the 2022 World Cup 12 years before the event's inception. before the events beginning in 2022 at a FIFA council meeting back in 2010. They have been implicated in bribery scandals in the European Parliament. You've had members of Senate go to jail because of Qatari bribes. Look at Bob Menendez, the senator from New Jersey, found with gold bars in his closet. You have members of Congress right now who are under indictment for allegedly being bribed by the Qataris. You have members of the different administrations who were accused of being Qatari agents without registering under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, or FARA. And outside of politics, they've invested billions of dollars in American universities. What they try to do is they try to find American centers of excellence in education. So if I was to ask you, what's the top medical school in the country, or one of the top 3 or 5? Cornell is an answer that comes up.
Cornell.
$1 billion medical campus from Cornell Doha in Qatar. Business. You want to get your MBA? You're going to go to Kellogg, right? $1 billion Northwestern. Computer science, Carnegie Mellon, a campus in Doha. Diplomacy and foreign affairs, Georgetown. And it goes on and on and on in terms of their investments. In fact, Texas A&M, for example, any intellectual property which is developed by Texas A&M or any of its subsidiaries, which was financed by the Qatari government, gives the Qataris ownership over any American know-how that might come out of that university. You even have today, April 28th, 2025, the University of Arizona sponsoring the Qatar Global Security Forum in Doha, along with some other wayward actors that we can get into a little bit. But they're hosting Ilan Pappé, one of the most notorious anti-Semitic academics and supporters of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, not to mention someone who is anti-Semitic, and more so, is being given a platform by the richest country on earth to be able to spew his vitriol in partnership with the public university that gets subsidized by taxpayer dollars. And that's just scratching the surface of their influence.
Last year, I actually conducted a research for a documentary about Qatari funds on American campuses and how it affects anti-Semitism. And what we found was that when more Qatari funds were being pushed into universities, the entire city, including the campus, had a higher rate of anti-Semitic reports. But what I also found was that was a correlation, and it was hard to prove that it was a causation. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. At least one university comes to mind, which is Georgetown. And this is actually the Alawite Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, or AMCU, which is, it's been around Georgetown for about 3 decades. And they have the worst Middle East studies and Islamic studies professors in the country in terms of their criticizing of Israel, their ties to terror organizations. In fact, one of their postdoctoral fellows was just wrapped up by Immigration and Customs Enforcement because of his alignment being the son-in-law of a Hamas member. Now, that being said, while correlation may not mean causation, there's a more trackable backdoor statistic that you can find of what types of students are attending these American university programs, which are in Doha. So if you look at a list of all of the professors that teach at Texas A&M Doha, you'll see quite a few Iranians there. If you compare that list to the partnerships that they have with Iranian universities where the professors have a dual hat, so there may be a professor of mechanical engineering at Texas A&M Doha, they wear the same hat at a program at the University of Shiraz, or Isfahan, or Tehran, and wherein those professors would not be given license to teach or conduct projects with American counterparts in the United States because they probably couldn't obtain a visa. Iranian students and Iranian professors can just cross the Gulf to attend these programs without having to worry about any screening in terms of who's actually getting the education. Those engineering students, those chemical engineering students, some taking advanced courses in nuclear engineering even, then just go back and start working in the Iranian nuclear program, taught by American professors. The best people we know how to be able to teach our best and brightest as it relates to American nuclear security and our atomic advances are then imparting that knowledge to people who go back to Iran and help their nuclear program. So take that parallel with Texas A&M and apply it to those areas of excellence we spoke about before. If you're at Carnegie Mellon and you're in the top computer science program in the country, the Iranians who study there in Doha have access to the same programs that people in Pittsburgh do, or in business, or in diplomacy. And it's a two-way street, by the way. The Qataris are making a generational investment in terms of people who are going to be the thought leaders of the U.S. leadership's next generation of the best of the best. Why would they give money to, I don't know, UCLA or to Arizona State University or wherever else? Not saying that they do, but they pick the top programs because they know that the people who spend a semester in Doha, who start a relationship with the Qataris, who are then monitored by Qatari security, who are becoming a tag or a target for a future Qatari influence operation, will be tapped 15 to 20 years down the line. And if they graduate, they get their master's degree, they get their PhD. Now they're in middle management of the U.S. National Security Agency or some sort of sensitive department, maybe in the military, maybe acting as an American diplomat. They've made that connection with Doha in their earliest years. So there's a whole panoply of strategies at play here, and many people only see headlines rather than the actual text which is going below it. And the true, I don't want to give a compliment to these guys so much, but the nefarious genius, the evil genius, which is behind their influence strategy. And if you want to stop their ability to impact Western decision making, you have to cut them out root and stem. It's not just about removing one university or highlighting a year of funding in front of a congressional committee. They have to be removed from having any positive relations with the United States until they reform or until they decide otherwise, that their actions of hosting Hamas, playing second fiddle for the Iranians, underwriting Syrian jihadists, allowing the Turkish regime to continue with their pernicious behavior towards Christians, Armenians, Israelis, Jews, whoever else, stops. If it doesn't, they have to be cut out.
So what I'm hearing from you is that Qatar is a country just even more extreme than some other countries that are known in the Middle East, and yet the reason that they sort of pass under the radar or are accepted or are seen as an American partner is because of the money.
It's not just because of the money, it's because of the unique situation where they become both arsonist and firefighter in global conflict. So let's talk about the hostage crisis for a second. There's sort of a square that you can draw, or imagine a playing field, right? You have the end zones on two sides. If it's a soccer pitch, you have goals on one end and the other, and you have the sidelines. So take the metaphor, extend it one step further. Hope I don't get lost in this. And you have Israel on one side and you have Hamas on the other. So on the Israeli side, you have Prime Minister Netanyahu, the IDF, the security forces. And on the Hamas side, you have members of Hamas, its Politburo, its military wing, and some of its cheerleaders, whether it's Iran or Turkey or anyone else. The Qataris have positioned themselves, at least as it relates to the hostages, as the referee in this game, this morbid game between Israel and Hamas, by acting as a so-called neutral arbiter or mediator between the two. But what they don't tell you is that the Qataris are both paying off members of the Israeli team, providing favorable calls for members of Hamas, and controlling both fan bases on the sidelines in terms of how the hostage crisis is meant to be resolved. So everything is stacked against the Israelis from the outset, because as it relates to the hostage forum, the Qataris have provided money to the very advisors who tell families of hostages how to be able to support their cause, often to the detriment of the state of Israel. If you look at their lobbying apparatus in the United States, tens of millions of dollars going to lobbyists to toe the Qatari line, which prevents the U.S. government from having a firm hand against Doha for hosting Hamas in the first place. In terms of their direct support for Hamas, 5-star hotels, jets ferrying Hamas leaders around the region, underwriting their stay in Turkey, even having the same individual who's running their global security conference right now being a special advisor to the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, underwriting the case against Israel's leadership on an individual level through the ICC and on a global level through the International Court of Justice. And then worse than any of this is the fact that they have now been accused of paying off members of the Prime Minister's staff. Not proven in court yet, presumed innocent until proven guilty. Maybe there's something else at work here, but they've essentially bought off all four sides of the game if these allegations are true. They have the hostage families support on their payroll. They have members of the Prime Minister's office allegedly on their payroll. Hamas is on their payroll. And people who are directly influencing policymakers in Washington, D.C. on their payroll. And then they have the gall to say that Qatar is not a progeny or aider and abetter of anti-Semitism like they did in the Jerusalem Post, or in an interview that took place yesterday. The Qatari Prime Minister gave an interview. They are not just running the game. They change the rules when they want to. They set the conditions on the field, and they have all the players at their whim, because they have set up the perfect influence operation. They begin it, they end it, they escalate it, they de-escalate it. They decide what happens and when because of their ability to position themselves in this way. And until people realize that and they wake up and they see that there are other actors who could replace them, the Qataris will continue with their behavior. It's all of our detriment.
Okay, two questions. Where is the money coming from, and which players are you referring to when you are talking about this?
So first, you have a coalition of 4 Arab countries, which would, I think, at least as it relates to whatever interests you think are respectable on the Palestinian side, sort of act as a guard or neutral arbiter for that. And that's Jordan, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. Qatar does not need to be part of that quad. They're both U.S. allies, and they have a semblance, with 3 of the countries having a relationship with Israel, and the other a very quiet relationship with Israel. In terms of where all the money's coming from, it's coming from Qatar. They have some of the wealthiest gas reserves, giving them tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars to deploy at their will to whatever their next influence project is invested in. It could be the hostage negotiations one day. It could be representing the United States in Afghanistan. If you are an American citizen who, God forbid, ends up in Kabul, Afghanistan, and you want to renew your passport, you have to go to the Qatari embassy. America's outsourced its diplomacy to Qatar in Afghanistan. If you want to go shopping at one of the best department stores in London, Harrods, you're giving the Qataris money because they own it. If you're going to the most famous football club, soccer club in Paris, Paris Saint-Germain, it's owned by the Qatari, Nasser bin Khalifa, and on and on and on and on. And they've done so well at this, and until we start peeling back the onion, the underlying thesis must be that if you cooperate with a Qatari agent or a Qatari-owned business or property, then you're essentially contributing to the rot that they pose both towards the United States, towards Israel, and in general, Western values.
And how do you want to fix this? I assume that you are talking about these players in the region needing to step up. Jordan, Saudi Arabia. How do you see this moving forward in the future?
I think that you have to, first of all, call the Qataris out on every act of misbehavior that they engage in, and do it in friendly media outlets, because they don't control everything. And it's not so much about messaging directly to the president or to his staff. It's about demonstrating that sunlight is the best disinfectant to get rid of the Qatari disease of influence and manipulation. So you're not calling people out. You're demonstrating that if you think the Qataris are your friend, there's plenty of evidence out there otherwise. And that's why I'm speaking to you right now, to be able to give examples of this and to share with your audience, many other audiences, about the threat that this poses to both the U.S. and to other allies. And then secondarily, to answer the second part of your question, you have to incentivize the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and the Emiratis that they stand to gain from their relationship with the United States if they're willing to step into the void that Qatar has created.
What do you think that we can expect to see if this continues to go unchecked?
I think Qatari tentacles and roots will dig deeper. They'll enmesh their collaborators even stronger. And in the long run, it will be to the juxtaposition of a scenario in which America's enemies gain and America's allies lose. And the net consequence of that is America loses.
So all of this is happening under the nose of the U.S. government. How do you respond to that? Why is this happening?
I think that the Qataris, to their credit, check a lot of boxes for the United States. U.S. Central Command has its main air base in the region at Al Udeid Air Force Base in Qatar. When the U.S. doesn't want to necessarily get its hands dirty in a regional situation, they could call it the Qataris. When you have so many former U.S. officials who have gone onto the Qatari payroll, and they use that influence and credibility that they bought up over decades of working in the U.S. government, and they deploy that to Qatar's benefit, again, it creates a net effect of not making the U.S. embrace Qatar, again, Qatar neutral. But you do have members of Congress, you do have members of the administration who do call the Qataris out, but not to the level that I would like to see. But frankly, take all that away to the side. As an organization, right now, if you were to rank U.S. national security priorities in terms of the immediate need right now, Iran is at the top of the list.